Hey, I'm Michael Hoff with Digital Theologian, and today we are talking Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. The Magi show up, there are signs in the heavens, King Herod gets scared, and they figure out where the Messiah is supposed to be born. Let's dive in. As we open up to chapter 2, we read in verse 1 that these events happened sometime during the days of King Herod and after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. So this gives us an endpoint of 4 BC, which is most likely when King Herod died. So the events that we are discussing here have to have happened sometime prior to 4 BC. Next comes the who, Magi or Wiseman from the east, and the what. They are asking questions about a child that has been born as the king of the Jews. Now we'll push pause here because that's especially threatening to Herod, not only because he is the king of the Jews at this time, and the announcement of the birth of another king of the Jews could have been highly problematic, especially one whose birth is signified in the heavens, pointing out that maybe God is looking for regime change and the people would be quick to get behind that. Throughout the ancient world, it is not uncommon for signs in the heavens to signify change in rulers of kingdoms. As we read the passage closely, we see that Herod and all of Jerusalem with him are frightened. Now this makes sense, first of all for Herod, because he's not a natural-born Jew. He was an Idumean, which, if you go back to the Old Testament, the folks that are Idumeans, they're Edomites. Having been born to someone who is not ethnically a Jew, Herod's role as a convert, as king of the Jews, is somewhat suspect. He is on shaky footing. So it's understandable that an announcement from some visiting dignitaries from a foreign country carrying gifts, looking at signs in the heavens, pointing to a newborn king of the Jews, someone who is a son of David, that could be very threatening for Herod. So all of Jerusalem being afraid is significant because throughout Matthew we will see that Jerusalem is set in opposition to Jesus. Those who are in power in Jerusalem are questioning Jesus' message, his motives, what he's doing in ministry, and they are the ones who have killed the prophets. And so we see here from the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew that Jerusalem is set in opposition to Jesus. So Jerusalem becomes a key word signifying the Jewish leadership specifically. And that may very well be the way that Matthew is intending it here, that not the entire city is scared, but especially those Jewish leaders who Herod has put in place and are leaning on him for their authority. In verse 4, we see that Herod has to call together the scribes and the chief priests in order to figure out where the Messiah is supposed to be born. Now, this may be a sitting group that Herod had access to because he wasn't a natural-born Jew. He didn't have the same level of in-depth knowledge about the Jewish people and the Jewish culture that somebody who was raised in Judaism and was ethnically Jewish would have just had naturally. And so it was understandable for him to keep a close council together. And some scholars have speculated that that is what we see here, that Herod is calling on his close council of Jewish advisors to help him understand the fine points of the law, the fine points of Judaism that he might not understand. I find it fascinating that as this group of leaders is called together, they're trying to figure out where the Messiah is supposed to be born. Herod doesn't know it automatically. It seems like the people around him don't know it automatically, right? There has to be this council. People have to work through some of the ramifications of what they're seeing in Scripture to land on where that Messiah is supposed to be born. And then, rather than seeking out that Messiah as these traveling magi do from the east, Herod is seeking for a very different purpose that comes up in the next section. Herod is threatened as a result of what he's hearing. As we move to verses 5 and 6, we have this quotation of Scripture. Again, Matthew is pointing out, here's what we have seen happen, and here scripturally is why this has happened. Matthew is making clear connections to the birth of Jesus and the events of his early life, linking them back to promises in the Old Testament about the people of God. By quoting these two verses, Matthew is linking together the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem with that birthplace of the Messiah and making the connection with Jesus as the ruler and shepherd of the people of God. And that 2 Samuel 5:2 quote is a direct connection to David, to King David, the ruler and shepherd of the people of God. And now Jesus will fulfill that role. And this is something that we will see throughout the Gospel of Matthew, that Jesus consistently announces the kingdom of heaven. He is coming and he is bringing the reign of God, the reign of heaven, throughout his preaching. As Jesus teaches, preaches, and heals, he is announcing and demonstrating the kingdom of heaven wherever he goes. He's operating in the authority and the power of a son of David as a king of kings from the beginning. Verse 7 gives us some insight into King Herod's character. He's having a secret conference with the wise men to find out exactly when the Messiah was born. He wants to know how old this child is. He wants to know exactly where this child is coming from. And he has some plans for the child that we will cover in next week's video. Through this secret meeting, we are getting insight into Herod's character. He's somebody that will pull together a secret cabal, who will have conferences with his advisors away from the public. He will then confer with people, trying to set them up to get just the right bit of information from them for his own purposes. And that's consistent with the portrait of Herod that shows up in other ancient writings, especially those by Josephus. Herod is a conniving individual. His throne is not secure. He is threatened by his children. He's threatened by his wife. He's concerned about political allies and what is going on around him. He's even concerned that people won't mourn him enough after he dies. And so as a result of that, in every instance I just mentioned, people end up killed. Herod had 2 of his own sons killed. He killed 1 of his wives. He had a political rival have an accident in a shallow pool. And it's even reported that he threatened to have regional leaders killed so that there would be countrywide mourning after he died, because he was so insecure that people would not mourn him enough. So in verse 8, we see Herod sending off these wise men so that, maybe he can have them come back and tell him exactly where they're born. And then I too will go pay homage. I'll be the one. I will go as the current king of the Jews and just worship this little child. I'll give him honor. I'll pay respect to this young, newborn king of the Jews. That's exactly what Herod will do. No, Herod is somebody who has consistently had his political rivals killed. He's not going to go worship them. But how could these wise men from the east have any indication of what Herod's intent would be? In verse 9, we get the wise men traveling away from Jerusalem about 5 miles to Bethlehem. This isn't some epic journey. They're going just a few miles up the road, and there the star stops moving. Once they find the exact house, they become overwhelmed with joy. They have been traveling for who knows exactly how long. They found the exact house with the child, and they bring their gifts before the king. They kneel down before Mary and Jesus. They pay respect to him, and they give him the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These are kingly gifts. Gold as a sign of wealth, frankincense and myrrh as expensive, exotic, valuable spices. These are not common items in the land of Judea. They're not things that grow there. Some of them grow in the Arabian Peninsula. They're farther south in Africa, but they aren't growing locally around this area. And so for these spices to have been brought in and given to Jesus, it was a costly gift worthy of a king. Finally, in verse 12, we're told that they have been warned in a dream to go back to their own country in a different way. So these wise men have been guided by a star from the beginning. The star leads them ultimately to the exact house that they are supposed to go to, and then they're warned in a dream that they should flee in another direction. All right, now for a word about these Magi, right? We don't know exactly what role they served within any specific ancient government, but Magi end up referenced throughout Daniel and in the Persian Empire and throughout other ancient Near Eastern writings as people coming from the east. And Often they have an astrological or divination role within the governments where they're serving. We see them show up in Daniel as these advisors, and they're often in opposition to Daniel and the people of God. But what Daniel is doing is in direct opposition and contrast to what's going on with these magi. But here we have them as foreign individuals of influence, recognizing that Jesus is a king, coming from a distant land, bringing him gifts worthy of honor. They have discerned the signs in the heavens, pointing to Jesus as the Messiah, and they have traveled in order to bring him gifts and give him honor. This invites us to worship Jesus as well. We should not, in this story, emulate Herod and the Jews of Jerusalem, who discern exactly where Jesus is to be born, where the Messiah is to come from, and they don't seek him out. This isn't Herod sending an envoy. This isn't Herod sending a group of faithful leaders from Jerusalem to go find the Messiah. We don't have a party of scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees going to seek Jesus. That's not the story. The story is that these men traveling from the east who have discerned what's going on in the heavens, they are the ones who are continuing to seek after Jesus, to find this King of the Jews. The Jews themselves aren't interested in this passage. They don't care. They're not concerned about where the Messiah is, or who the Messiah is, or that the Messiah has been born. They were afraid because of the political implications and ramifications with the Roman government and all of the authority that they had at the time. They did not seek out the Messiah. And yet, we have people from beyond the nation of Israel seeking to find the King of the Jews. And that is a theme that will persist throughout the Gospel of Matthew. Okay, so what do we do about this star? There have been three major views throughout history that have gotten a lot of traction, and we can't say definitively exactly what was going on here, but it is clear from the narrative that the purpose of the star is to guide those who are seeking for the King of the Jews to find Jesus in Bethlehem and to bring him honor and glory. But it's been suggested by some that it was a comet, and Halley's Comet comes in 7 BC, but that doesn't put it close enough to the time of Jesus. Unfortunately, astronomers haven't been able to identify any comets that would have come during the appropriate time frame. Halley's Comet gets close in 12 to 11 BC, but that is too early and it doesn't fit the timeline of the rest of the events in the Gospels. So a comet doesn't really make the best sense of the data. The second suggestion is a planetary conjunction, that two planets have come together to make a star in the sky that seems brighter and would have remained in the same general place over time. The most likely conjunction to fit the time frame of 7 BC was in Pisces. You have Saturn and Jupiter coming together. The third option is a nova or supernova, a stellar explosion that would have left a bright light in the sky, brighter than normal, that could have lasted for a significant period of time. And Chinese astronomers recorded one in 5 to 4 BC, and it lasted for approximately 70 days. And this was the favorite theory of Johannes Kepler, the famous astronomer. But does that make the best sense of the data? I can't say, in part because I'm not an astronomer. I don't know these things. I can't weigh this data in the same way. I'm ultimately not troubled whether these events were a specific star, whether it was a supernova, a nova, a comet. That ultimately doesn't matter to me. I think any of those could have been called a star by an ancient writer. And even if we don't know the exact nature of the astrological phenomena that occurred, man, we can see that these events pointed to Jesus being recognized as the Messiah. And there's not enough data for us to be able to dismiss the account of Matthew out of hand. There are a number of plausible explanations. And so without being able to pinpoint exactly when this occurred and exactly what kind of astrological sign it was, we don't need to get hung up on the details. don't lose sight of the forest for the trees. As we're wrestling with what is going on, I think the most important thing is to recognize that Matthew is writing with a theological purpose, and he is intending to point to Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of David, and linking him to the kingly line. And he's doing that here through this passage and in inviting us to be like those wise men, like those Magi, to seek after the King of the Jews, to bring our gifts and lay them at his feet, to be people who genuinely worship Jesus and are overwhelmed by joy at what we discover in him. The next video in even greater detail is going to make connections between Jesus and Moses and link the two to establish that ongoing pattern of Jesus as the new Moses, the prophet like Moses from Deuteronomy that was prophesied and that the people of Israel were called to listen to. I encourage you, read along with the rest of Matthew chapter 2, and I will see you guys in the next one. May God bless you. Have an amazing day. Thanks for watching.